This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. This is a Fast Break Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Anderson. And alongside me, as always, is Dave Oster.
What's up, everybody?
Ricky is currently in VidCon, and we are reacting to the NBA Draft 2017. We're wearing our Hawaiian shirts, our NBA draft shirts. It was a fun night. We did the live stream. It took us 3 tries to do it, but we got it done.
Something like 1,800 people total.
Yeah,
that viewed it.
And we streamed for about
3 hours.
3 hours.
The longest NBA draft ever in the first round.
And the biggest thing that really threw us off was the Butler trade.
Yeah,
and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler on both sides, both the Bulls side and the Timberwolves side tonight. So we're going to talk about those two tonight, and we'll have more draft talk recorded tomorrow. But we're at least getting the Butler stuff done tonight. And let's jump in on the Bulls side. If you haven't heard, Jimmy Butler is now on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Jimmy Butler and the 16th overall pick, Justin Patton. And then going to the Bulls was Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and the 7th overall pick that ended up being Lauri Markkanen. So let's look at the Bulls side first. Obviously, trading Jimmy Butler, a focal point of this franchise for a while. Dave, what was your initial thoughts when just Jimmy Butler was traded? Not anything that was coming over, but just the fact that Jimmy Butler was finally off this team.
You know, I was okay with it because as a team, we were we knew where we were. We're a team that will not compete for a championship, but we're not bad enough to tank and get top picks. You know, we had, even without signing Dwayne Wade and Rondo, Jimmy Butler on his own carries us out of that range. So it's a little bit frustrating knowing that we're stuck in the no man's land of the NBA. So moving on from Jimmy, I'm fine. I was assuming we got a good deal. I was sorely disappointed. It was not the ideal deal.
Well, let's look at the deal because obviously LaVine, Dunn, and Lauri Markkanen are now Bulls. So looking at Zach LaVine coming off the ACL injury, do you think that he is enough to be the focal point of the deal? Do you think he is the focal point of the deal? Who do you think the focal point of the deal is? If not,
focal point. Just say it one more time.
Focal point. Is Zach LaVine the focal point of the deal?
I think he is. This is a guy who has the third option, was having a phenomenal shooting year. He's putting up like 19 points a game, shooting really well all around the court. Honestly, the big question is, how is he going to react and recover from this injury? It's not a slight knee injury. It's a serious injury. So, honestly, to me, it's just, yeah, he has potential to be an absolute stud for us going forward. I loved him a couple of years ago.
Just turned 22 in March.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to love about him. The problem is, okay, we've got Jimmy Butler for him. That's not even. So we look at the next guy up, and that's Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn, a player who I think a lot of Chicago fans fell in love with last year during the draft, and we couldn't pull the trigger. Couldn't pull the trigger on him. He had a good summer, and then him in the regular season was one hell of a disappointment. Honestly, he was overwhelmed by the NBA game. He was not able to pick it up as quickly as people expected for a player who has been playing a little bit longer, a little longer in the tooth. Offensively, he was not efficient. He was not clear.
That's saying
I'm being nice.
There, yeah.
I'm being nice.
37% from the field, 28% from 3. He was brutal from the field. He could not shoot or score.
He shouldn't have the basketball near him. But no, like he's a defensive point guard who is a good passer, and that's fine. There is some value there. This is, I think, overrating his value to put him in this trade. I mean, I get it. We wanted another point guard. We obviously took a stab at campaign last year because Garpax is just idiotic.
He was the future point guard for the Bulls.
The future point guard of the Bulls, according to Ricky Widmer.
No, that was to Garpax. Garpax even said that.
Ricky acknowledged it, which just killed me enough.
But looking at Lauri Markkanen, because obviously now bringing him into the factor, because when we heard that pick and that was coming through, that Lauri Markkanen was going to be a Bull, we were honestly flabbergasted.
I was happy with the 7 because the 7 could be anything. It could be a boat.
It could have been Dennis Smith Jr.
It should have been Dennis Smith Jr.
It could have been Frank.
It could have been Frank. Could have been Malik Monk. Oh my God, there's so many guys it could have been.
And obviously you just got 2 guards in, so maybe you don't want to over compensate, bring in a lot of guards. You have fair. 2 young guards, but then again, we look at Lauri Markkanen, a guy that we have fallen hard on coming through our last mock draft. So at least looking at those 3. Do you think it was enough for the Bulls to start a rebuild? Could you see these three being the face of the Chicago Bulls franchise?
I can see Zach LaVine being the face of the Chicago Bulls franchise.
But how far does that take you?
Right, it doesn't take you very far. Chris Dunn could be a good player. Look, a lot of the NBA these days is fit. And if you don't fit a system, or if you're not able to pick up a system, you don't look comfortable in it, your play is worse, the guys around you play worse. It is a very snowball effect. So I think what I'm most curious to see is Chris Dunn in this Fred Hoiberg system and what he'll be able to contribute. I don't think it's a done deal that he's our, point guard waiting in the wings behind Rondo. I mean, if you have one mentor as Chris Dunn, you should look up to Rondo. That is a guy who has done a lot with an inefficient shot. So by all means, become a sponge, attach yourself to him, duct tape yourself to his back. I don't care what it takes. You have to learn how to play point guard from someone who can do it with a similar tool set.
Well, and I think that's one big thing and one big takeaway, at least for the Chris Dunn pick, is because you look at least the skill sets that they do bring. Chris Dunn is very good on the defensive side. He's a guy that's very active. He's a guy that's going to go for steals, and Rondo in his prime was a guy very similar to that. Also, Chris Dunn is going to be able to set up his teammates. Rondo, obviously, again, in his prime, was able to do that. Even last year, he was able to do that. It's just the scoring aspect that really hurt Chris Dunn, but we kind of went away from that once we saw the Summer League play, but then obviously those kicked back up again. His best month in the NBA last year was in March. He shot 46% from the field. He shot 33% from three, 75% from the stripe, grabbed 2.4 rebounds per game, averaged assist and a half a game, had steal and a half a game, and then averaged 5 points per game as playing in 19 and a half minutes. Not a spectacular year at all, but there's nice numbers there at least.
It's not wowing me as the number 5 pick,
No, but you still have some potential there, and it wasn't like a crazy reach the Timberwolves going and getting him at 5.
No, I think he was a consensus, top 8 pick. I think across the board, nobody would have been surprised him going anywhere in top 8. So fair enough, but still, it's a guy who underperformed heavily. So we're taking a stab in the dark. Like maybe it was a bad fit. Maybe he didn't get the system. Maybe there's still upside there. I mean, he is only 23 at this time. So fair enough. Let's give it a shot.
Well, and one thing too that might help him is 3-point shooting, which the Bulls don't have.
Neither does he.
But still, something that might help him is 3-point shooting, and the T-Wolves weren't that great of a 3-point shooting team last year. They weren't, killing you from the outside. That really hurt them. That's why teams were either looking at a 4 or an outside shooter that can help boost their 3, and that really hurt when LaVine went out. So looking at this, do you think the system that he will now be in, the Fred Hoiberg system of kind of run and gun, up pace mentality, up tempo focus, would help Chris Dunn? Obviously, I think it will help Zach LaVine if he's coming back, because he's a speedy
Zach
player.
Becoming our number 2 option scoring will be huge for him. Obviously, Dwayne Wade's still on the roster at this time, so we have to assume he's the number 1. But LaVine comes in clean as the number 2, and I'm curious to see what more touches on him look like. I think Chris Dunn could fit this, honestly, because what we saw out of Rondo at the end of last season, the last 2 weeks plus the first 2 games of the playoffs, was a very well-run system. The question is, honestly, it was heavily tweaked from the Hoiberg system, and I felt like that was a little more Rondo taking over a game. So I wonder, are we finding a middle ground of what works for our guys, and is that what Fred's going to let them do going forward? Are we going to play more of what Rondo showed us, or is it going to look more like what we were earlier in the season? And I think, honestly, compromise is the best way to go about this. Like, Hoiberg, I know you don't have the guys you want. I know they don't have the skill set you want to work in your system. So you have to change it. You have to adapt to the NBA. Otherwise, you won't have much longer as a coach with the Chicago Bulls, in my mind. And
now let's look at kind of the future, at least for next season, for the Chicago Bulls, because that's going to change a lot with Jimmy Butler being out. Vincent Goodwill of CSN Chicago is just tweeted about 14 minutes ago that Dwayne Wade is still taking his player option for $23.8 million next season. So the Butler trade isn't affecting anything. So he's going to be on the Chicago Bulls, at least for right now. And then you also look at Rajon Rondo. I think they need to make a move on him by Friday, or it's some Friday coming up. He's still guaranteed $3 million, but he's still got $13 million still left out there. So looking at this, should they pick up the option on Rajon Rondo and bring him back?
Absolutely.
So you're going to bring him back. You're going to have Chris Dunn be your backup, and then what's the starting lineup kind of looking like?
Yeah, I think the value of a Rajon Rondo on this roster, especially with these young kids coming in, is massive. Bring him back for this year. I don't know if it's going to be a long-term answer. I know he's an older point guard, but like he could be here for 3 years. He could be here for just the half of this year and want to move along to a contender. Honestly, though, the value of bringing him back is huge. Like I said, play style wise, there's no one better that we could have Chris Dunn learn from than Rajon Rondo. He's one of the smartest players in basketball. And honestly, the play style, the traits, if you look at Rondo coming out of college, I'm not saying they were super similar, but it's fair enough that you can see enough between them. Be like, yeah, I could see how Chris Dunn could try to mold his game in the fashion of Rajon Rondo. I think that would fit him really well. Obviously, we have Dwayne Wade at the 2. And they'll be sharing point guard duties, obviously, as we've seen. Dwayne Wade is very comfortable with the ball in his hands.
There's no way you can't put Levine at the 3.
Yeah, Levine is your 3 because otherwise your option is Zip God. So
yeah, I mean, he's smaller. He's 6'5". I mean, it's going to be a small lineup with Rondo being 6'1", D Wade being around 6'4", 6'3", whatever he is now. He's probably shrinking now. Yeah. Levine being 6'5". I mean, that's going to be a small,
little small
lineup there.
But then you come in with the 7-footer Markkanen, playing the 4.
He's going to start over Portis?
I think he walks in over Portis. Honestly, like, the problem is Portis looks good in Summer League. Portis looks good at the end of the year. Portis looks like shit the rest of the time.
He didn't look bad in the postseason.
That's what I'm saying. End of the year. Okay, end of the year, he has that magical month. It's him and Nico. We're just trading off like, oh, you get a game, I get a game. You get a game, I get a game. And they went with a hot hand, and that's the way you handle that situation. But that doesn't work all year. That's the problem. Like, he was so bad so often for the majority of the year that I think that, honestly, going into camp, it'll be an open competition for that starting 4. And I think Markkanen, purely because of his shooting and like nothing else, I think Portis probably has the better chance of being, a full-time two-way player and contributing more. But Markkanen shooting could just put him over the top of that starting lineup.
Obviously, Markkanen struggled at the end of the season, but you did still see some consistency from him from the outside.
True.
They did move him around a lot. They tried to put him inside. They tried to.
Yeah.
So maybe this will kind of push the Bulls away from putting him inside, which would be good because the Bulls will definitely try to do that at some point in his career.
Yeah. They will.
At least they'll keep him on the outside, so maybe you won't at least find that struggle where you'll have Nico be cold and Bobby be cold, or one of them be hot or both of them be hot at the same time. At least if you're getting consistent production from Laurie from that 3, then maybe that will be a bolster.
Yeah.
So what are you expecting at least Laurie to make him a successful pick? Because obviously 7th is a high pick for him. We talked about his kind of lack of quickness. We talked about his lack of defensive ability. We talked about his fantastic shooting ability, shooting over 43% out of Arizona. Do you think he has enough there to possibly develop into a third option, or possibly a second option if Levine stays the second option? We bring in another player to become the first option, or Levine moves up and another player becomes the second, and Laurie becomes the third, or Laurie becomes the second. Do you think he has the ability to become that second go-to guy, that third go-to guy in the NBA?
I'm not going to shit on him, so I will say there's a chance he could be a 2. It's a long shot, though, in my mind.
What would it take for him to develop? And is he in the right system for it?
He is in the right system. I don't know if they have enough supporting cast to really stretch out the floor the way they ideally want it to be stretched. But honestly, it's just a scenario where he needs to be extremely efficient from that three-point line and make sure that the amount of times he gets beat on the pick and roll that's the game plan. Is your offense better than your defense? Yes. But can it compensate appropriately? Like, guys like Doug McDermott and easy answers, because last year Nico on the pick and roll was just every time they brought the ball down the court. If Nico was on the court, they were pick and roll against him, and it was free baskets. Like, he needs to be able to at least show some effort and some serious effort trying to get around that, trying to make defensive stops. If he doesn't, then I think it's going to be a really disappointing shot. But I could see him walking in like first year, 12 points a game kind of a guy. I could see him being, somewhere between, like, his floor, people had mentioned somewhere between, my comparison is still Ryan Anderson.
Yeah.
Somebody else has mentioned Channing Frye. There's a lot of these guys who are able to stretch the floor with size, but personally it's just like, I don't know if he'll ever be that number 2 guy. It's a long shot in my mind because he's going to have to average something along the lines of, like 17 and 7, and his rebounding game isn't the best. So he needs to improve rebounding. I mean, he can get them if he tries, but I feel like for him, a lot of it is going to be conditioning because playing an NBA level tempo, you're going to have to slim down. He's he's a bigger guy, but he moves pretty smooth. But he doesn't have the conditioning to keep it up for an entire game.
Yeah, I mean, he played roughly 30 minutes per game, 31 minutes per game last year in Arizona, and it's just something where when you are able to stand on the outside and you don't have to do that much defensively, because he wasn't a guy that was going to play defense at all. He wasn't playing defense at all for that Arizona team. He was just a guy who was taking up space. He's not a guy that has any defensive game at him at all, and he does have the body at least. He's got a 7-foot body right now. He's got wingspan, and he's got the shot. So that's something that you do really like to see, not only in this NBA, but it's something that you just like to see out of a big man. I mean, 7-footer that could shoot threes, that has this nice of a stroke. I mean, that's something that's hard to pass up.
Oh, yeah, there's value there. I get it. But in my mind, there was higher upside guys
available.
Yeah, that were available at the 7. But with him, with Zach LaVine, with Chris Dunn, I think that there is a true commitment to the rebuild from the Bulls standpoint. Whether I like the way it went down or not doesn't really matter. What's done is done, and I'm looking forward.
Are you?
I'm not happy.
Let's get to the rebuild part, because this is the part that I've been holding off, and I think this is the part that we should be talking about, and this is the part that is probably the biggest question, and it's Garpax, and it's the approach of this Jimmy Butler trade, and it's the approach of the past couple seasons, and it's just the approach of this kind of organization in general. This trade, and I think you'll agree with me here, the Bulls got squeezed on it. The Bulls.
How did we give up our 16th pick, Sean?
That was the thing.
How?
The original report.
Why?
The original report from Casey Johnson was that it was just Jimmy Butler for the 7, LaVine, and Dunn. That sounds like a fair trade. That sounds like enough. Even if you take Laurie at the 7, I still think that's a fair trade.
Absolutely.
But it's that 16th that's really the killer. That if you have that pick, you can get a guy like a Justin Patton. You can get a guy who can be your future center. And then you could pair him with his inside game and his mid-range game, along with that Lauri Markkanen who can stretch the floor. And you can pair that with a guy in Zach LaVine who could be an outside shooter who can drive inside. And you can pair that with a Chris Dunn who can be a guy who really sets up players.
I'm just saying we could have taken, a solid point guard at 7, got like TJ Leaf at 16. I would have been thrilled.
You could have gotten...
Really fucking genius move. We've got 4 guys under the age of 24, and we've got our core for the future. I am happy.
And you look at 7, I mean, there was so many opportunities there to get different players. Monk, Smith, Frank, and you go with Laurie. Yep. And it's something that just baffled me, that I get it. You want to fill a position. You want to fill a stretch 4.
But this is now 3 picks in 4 years. 3 picks. Yeah, like pretty much. No, Nico is a little further back, but still it feels, because we've only seen him for 2 years in Chicago. I think the thing is, it's just, yes, we're investing heavily at this stretch 4. I don't understand the obsession with it, and I think that Bobby Portis has, like I said, not been consistent, but I've seen flashes of him being a two-way player who I totally trust, and the reason why I was letting him be in the second unit is because I trust him with that second unit. He looked very comfortable being in charge of a second unit, being that second guy on, you have your 6-man, and when we were playing, it was like weirdly Rondo, and then him being kind of the off-ball guy, and they worked really well together. I'm very comfortable with that. So that's why that kills me so much more that we went and dropped the 7 pick on Markkanen.
I think they got fleeced. I think
we did.
The Bulls got fleeced. The Bulls got fleeced, and I don't think there's any way that you can really get around it. Because if you had that 16th pick, you're at least getting more there, and you're at least getting more for the rebuild. Because you look at the 2 players that you're probably going to lose is Dwayne Wade after this year and Rajon Rondo after the next year. So those 2 guys are going to be gone. Those 2 guys are starters that you're losing, and you're losing a starter already in Jimmy Butler. Those are 3 starters that aren't going to be here next year. So you're replacing those with 3 other starters in Zach LaVine, who's a downgrade from Jimmy Butler. I would say Chris Dunn is a very shaky project, and you're not sure if he's going to pan out. And Laurie, again, a shaky project. So if you have that 16th pick to at least round it out, and you go with the Justin Patton, who again is pretty much a shaky project, the guy can't play any defense, he still brings a nice touch on that offensive game. So if a guy like Laurie is struggling, if a guy like Chris Dunn is struggling to put up points, you have a Justin Patton. And I'm not saying Justin Patton would be the pick, but at least that's who the Minnesota Timberwolves picked.
Yeah, I mean, there were still plenty of names on the board that I would have been happy with.
And that's the thing is I think the regime there in Garpax got absolutely fleeced on this deal. And it's not even what else they could have got. It was just the fact that they gave up that 16th pick.
It's like the deal with the Thunder. It's how did that deal go so wrong? How did Taj and McDermott also have to include a pick with it to get back
Campaign, Morrow, and Joffrey Laverne? I mean, it's just something that I don't understand how little they got back from Jimmy Butler. And I think Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, nice pieces. I think those are nice pieces that you can help a rebuild, for sure. Yep. Don't think those are bad players. It's not like a campaign, an Anthony Moore on Joffrey Laverne. I mean, campaign pretty much for Dougie and Taj. That was pretty much your pieces. Taj would have helped in the playoffs. And if he walks, he walks. It's better than having campaign on your team, to be honest. So you look at this, and I just wonder, and I'm baffled at how little they got from Jimmy Butler. If it was Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, 7th pick, fine, whatever, that's fine. I think you still lose that trade, but if you just want to move on from Jimmy Butler, you move on from him.
I don't have the extra question,
and you get pieces. Yep. But it's still that fact of how do you not understand that? I mean, just trade a second. Maybe even a second would have worked.
Yeah, we had the 38th pick.
I don't understand how this happened, and I think not only are the claims of Garpax been fair to get fired before this trade, but I think it really should be solidified after this trade that Garpax have no idea what they're doing. And it's something where you kind of understand the pick of Laurie because he's going to help space the floor. It's going to help this Fred Hoiberg
offense.
Fred Hoiberg offense of running and gunning and at least setting up shooters on the outside. That makes sense. However, it's still, it doesn't have to make sense if you're not getting the value. I can trade 3 players for 1 and hope, 2 of those players turn out to be all-stars, and I'm getting rid of an all-star, I'm getting 2 all-stars back. But it's the fact that you don't know if 2 of those guys will be starters.
We have a top 15 player on our team. We had a top 15 player on our team in Jimmy Butler. God, that's going to hurt. And we're getting back Zach LaVine, who has potential to be one of the better offensive weapons in the league. Defense, if he wants to. Like, it's honestly not a given with him. Chris Dunn, I have very low expectations for because of his extremely poor performance, his rookie year. I mean, completely out of place, like I said. And Laurie, I mean, Zach is the best chance of becoming a staple and a potential all-star. I don't think he'll ever be a top 15 player, though. Laurie, unless he somehow turns into Dirk Nowitzki, not going to be a top 15 player.
And I think the other thing, too, is the contract of Jimmy Butler. Because
the value was there.
He had so much value.
Are you telling me that the Celtics didn't offer us a better deal than this up to this point?
And but that was the thing I didn't want to go to is what are the Celtics offering? What is your X team offering? Because we
don't know yet, and we'll never know.
We have no clue. The Celtics seem pretty set with JT, and they were saying he was the number 1 pick, the number 1 guy on their board the whole time, and they got him at 3. Whatever. If Danny Ainge wants to say that, he can say that.
I was gonna say that's the most Danny Ainge thing. Hey, the Bulls did just pick up Jordan Bell though.
And Golden State acquired Jordan Bell from the Bulls for cash.
God damn it!
There you go. I like that pick.
Yeah.
But the thing that I want to bring up is at least, you bring in a lot of potential, but that potential could have been more. And that's why I go back to the 16th pick is because then you're not getting rid of another guy who can become an all-star, and become another all-team NBA guy if that 16 guy shows up, because that draft was so deep that 16 and 7 wasn't that crazy. Justin Patton versus Lauri Markkanen wasn't that big of a talent drop-off.
No.
It wasn't like last year. So you have 2 guys that you could have these 4 guys compared to this 1, but now you just moved them over. It's a 3-2 deal, and it just seems like it was completely lopsided for the Bulls. And again, I understand the want to move on from Jimmy Butler. I understand the want of getting potential here.
You shouldn't have to pay to move Jimmy Butler.
You shouldn't have to pay to move Jimmy Butler. It's insane. But I think unless you have any final remarks that you want to make, I think it's time to move on to the winners of this deal in Minnesota.
I think that's fair.